Thank you. All right. Thank you, guys. Awesome. Everybody's here and got a nice seat. I never prepare any statements, so let's see what happens here. First of all, I want to say, thank you all for being part of the show, for submitting, and congratulations again on getting in. I know anybody that got in the show is obviously thrilled, and we know there were a lot that didn't get in. And as Robert and I have said, as we looked at all the images, all the photography was fantastic, but only so many would fit on the wall of the gallery, right? So I want to thank you all again, and it's great that you're here. We got nearly 30 of the photographers here out of 52. Also, it was really great to have such a great international show again. This time we have Ethiopia represented for the first time ever in the gallery, 2 from Japan, and 1 from Denmark. Actually, 2 images from 1 photographer in Denmark, so that's really nice too, as usual. I want to thank again Robert for agreeing to jury a show for Lightbox, which was really a thrill when I asked him a few months ago if he wanted to work together on something, and for him to come up with the theme that we all submitted to. That was really nice, and I was excited to see the theme as being so personal but general at the same time, and I think it's created a really beautiful show. Robert definitely has a unique eye and a unique focus on his photography. As I sat with him as he selected the images, I was really amazed at how he looked at each one intently, and he either said yes or no. I mean, he kind of knew what he wanted, and I never quite figured out what that was. But it was really a fantastic experience, and I got to express to all of you guys how much I enjoyed that, and I want to thank Robert one more time for and now here we are after all that work with a beautiful show on the walls, and what we're going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Robert for a minute for just a few words, and we really just want to open this talk up as a discussion with everyone. If you want to ask a question as we get talk, just speak loud so Robert can understand, and also we're going to see how the projection of the sound goes. I've got a mic here if we happen to need it, but I think that's all I wanted to say. I know that's way too much, but but anyway, I want to turn it over to Robert here for a few words that he'd like to express.
So if you can hear me, I don't know. My voice is, I'm 81 years old. I'm an old guy. I got one eye and one ear. So you're going to have to speak loudly. I want to say 2 things generally and then make a note or 2. The first is I want really to thank everybody here and actually everybody who submitted work. I don't know you, obviously most of you, but I find that except for my years during the Vietnam War when I was a teacher and I had students going there and coming back damaged, that this is one of the worst times in the country that I have ever known. And what you have done really gave me courage, frankly. It referenced things that are beyond the current crisis, and I really thank every one of you for doing it. It takes real courage, and so I knew once I began looking at the pictures that I was in unusual company, and as I say, I'm grateful. The other thing I would like to, sounds like a congratulatory exchange here, but I want to thank Michael and Chelsea for keeping this unusual, beautiful, beautiful gallery open. I have to admit that when I first saw it 10 years ago, walked in, I was astonished, and I also thought, if this is open in 6 months, I will be amazed. And here we are 10 years later. It's a real accomplishment. It's a terrific day-to-day commitment that these people have made, and it's very unusual. The other couple of things I would like to say.
Can everyone hear okay?
No.
In the room?
Do you want me to?
Why don't you just come in the room a little bit so you can hear a little bit? Come on in the room a little bit.
Yeah, no problems here.
There's room to sit down here. You can't sit on the floor.
Okay, Robert.
One thing I would like to say in my own defense, when we selected these pictures, I did not have any linkage between a name and a picture. So it was the only kind of defense that I had, really, against embarrassment, although I have to say that after we got done, it turned out that I knew 3 people that didn't get onto the wall. And interestingly enough, I knew the man whose picture is on the cover of the catalog for years, but I had never seen anything remotely like that picture. So, as I say, it was for me, it was working blind. The other thing that I want to note is that beyond the excellence of the pictures, which obviously was primary, I did try to acknowledge somewhere a variety of interpretations, sensitivities, traditions. So we had, as Michael has indicated, we had over 900 pictures sent in. We had 60 places that we could use. So there really were pictures that I loved that we couldn't hang. So all that to say that I really appreciate what's there, but it was a tough job. So, what do you want to talk about? There are 2 ways to. Sometimes I've been roped into doing this kind of thing by agreeing to talk for 15 minutes, but I decided this time, since I've done 4 books of brief essays about photography, it seemed kind of pointless to rehearse some things. So I decided just to let her rip and see what's on your mind.
Cool. Anybody have any questions for Robert? Anything you've been wondering about over the last few weeks?
Yeah, or,
Yeah, I do actually.
Michael Aleko, right?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
This is for
which?
The one of the rabbi there on the second.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
How did you interpret the sacred? What does that mean to you? Because I look at all these shots. It's like, I think I chose a subject out of exhaustion, disgust, despair. Every time I turn on the television for news, I'm just at my wit's end. And so what I wanted to get was people who were committed to something of absolute importance, something that changed your commitment each morning as you got up. So the meaning of the word was very, very broad. And so we've got, as you have observed, we've got pictures that Thoreau would have been happy with. We've got pictures that are overtly Christian, Islamic, Buddhist, at least they're represented here, and of a number of nationalities. So sacred in this context for me just meant something that gave meaning and value in the face of very, very stiff competition right at the moment.
That's great. Thank you.
It's a strange time for photography, incidentally. I guess we all know that. But I mean, technology has overturned some of our expectations. Although, frankly, I'm struck. I've just been writing a piece for Aperture, and I'm struck by how much is the same, actually. When people hand me their smartphones and tell me to look at something, it's very small. You have to kind of tip it to see what you're looking at, and you have to pass it to your friend because it's hard for two people to look at it at the same time. And it really seems to me a lot like opening the case of a little daguerreotype, tipping it, seeing if you can get it. So in a way, it's remained private for most people, I think, but also for people like those in this room. There's always been a minority of folks who wanted to use photography to try to locate meaning in life and share that discovery. So.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What's between meaning and beauty? What is the beauty part in your opinion?
I'm going to probably wander all over the place and try to answer that. But for me, beauty is the touchstone word for not just photography, but art in general. And it refers most often, historically, to the discovery of form, of shape in life, whether it's the form in a human being or in a landscape. And so that seems to me to be mostly what we're looking to find. And form is again, I speak just for myself, but I think there's a history in this. Form is a kind of metaphor for meaning, for coherence in art. And art is a concretized universal, it seems to me. It's a specific case that has wider reverberations if you're looking carefully as a photographer or a painter or somebody looking at a painting or photograph. So it depends on intuition, but I just a day or two ago I came on a statement by a guy named William Gedney, who some of you may know. He's a photographer who died pretty young and whose work has continued to remain of interest to a lot of people. You might know a picture of three girls, sisters apparently, in a kitchen in Appalachia. Some of you have seen it. Gedney took that. Gedney, in his journals, remarked, all facts eventually lead to mysteries. And it seems to me that's really a photographer's statement, because photography inherently, until very recently, was concerned with the way life looks, the surface of life. And yet the photographers that you and I respect and that we hope to be a little bit like look so carefully at facts, at specifics, that they become resonant and of something more. And usually that something more we end up tacking the word beauty to. But of course, it's tough. There's some pictures here that are not beautiful in the conventional sense. At least they're deeply disturbing. Piles of logs, the picture of the memorial for the Holocaust, I think it's in Berlin. There's several pictures in here that capture the struggle. So, as you know, I myself think that the pictures I try hardest to find, and usually don't, but am happiest to find, are those that have a unity, have some form, imply coherence in life, but that also have some indication of life as we know it, which is to say, life with something wrong about it. The pictures that I treasure often are those that capture a little bit of both. But it doesn't, usually you don't get them both in the same picture, that's for sure. You either get an angry picture or an affirmative picture, but not both. Yes?
I want to comment and ask a question. Expanding a little on your definition. I think a lot of people confuse beauty or beautiful with pretty. There are lots of pretty pictures.
Yes.
To me, a beautiful picture is one that has meaning and has depth to it.
Exactly. You said it.
And the question I have is, what happened to the other 4 pictures I submitted?
I know. My wife and I have had a series of visitors. I think everybody around the country has determined this is the coolest place, maybe not this room, but the coolest place on the map. And they've also seen that I'm 81, and I think they came out to experience the coolness and see if I was still standing. But I just had a curator yesterday, as a matter of fact, who was here, and he warned me that he had faced someone after an event like this who came up to him and looked him straight in the eye and said, "Why am I not on the wall?" And there, it's really a tough racket we're all in. It's not helped by the fact that it's trying to make honest. You're trying to make honest, meaningful work in a museum, gallery, except for Michael's, academic complex that is basically seriously distorted away from our values by money. And the art world, I think, in 25 years, if we're still around, they're going to say, look, how perfectly the art world is a mirror image of the hedge fund world. And so it's a really tough thing to. I was very, very lucky. I got into photography just before it exploded and was widely recognized as a legitimate activity. And then none of us survive alone, I can tell you that. But I've been really lucky. I've had a half a dozen people who managed to help my wife and I survive for the 50 years we've been doing it. And it's just been, up and down the whole time. And we wouldn't have survived if it hadn't been for my wife's continuous income as a librarian. So you got my total empathy as far as what it comes to.
difficult times are now politically. If you could drink a magic potion and wake up tomorrow and be at the prime of your photographic life and have boundless energy and good eyes and good ears, what do you think you'd be gravitating towards now as a say, a young photographer to deal with the times that we're living in?
Boy, that is a great question. Before the current nightmare started, what I used to think if I had the courage I would do was to try to address factory farming, amidst which we used to live in Colorado, unidentified, long aluminum one-story buildings where nobody talked about what was going on inside except when you heard what was going inside occasionally. But boy, what have you got to? I have to confess, I'm an old guy. That is such a good question.
No, I don't have a better answer. Personally, I'm kind of overwhelmed.
Well, that's what I feel. I'm just absolutely. This is nowhere I thought I would be.
None of us ever thought we'd be here.
Yeah,
Commodified completely.
It is.
It was in New York City when Andy Warhol put his things up, and Mr. Ansel sold his print at Folger's Coffee. It was the very beginning of it.
That could well be, and Ansel was a strange, complicated
He was a
guy.
yeah.
He ended up supporting nuclear power and drove a Cadillac with a horn that played 76 tunes on it. And yet he was a very ardent conservationist, of course, and did a lot of good. So, and took one of the great pictures that I think will be around after all of us are gone. Moonrise Hernandez, New Mexico, will still be here, and it will still be an electrifying picture. So, but it's hard. I don't know what the answer is. But.
Anybody else have any?
Yeah, so I've noticed, not just in your book, but also I saw your show at the Portland Art Museum, and I noticed the attention that was paid to the sequencing of the prints and where they were on the wall. And I'm interested in hearing how you thought about that for this show.
That's interesting. Michael sequenced it. And I didn't get into the Portland show. I've got digestive problems, which will, if I go take a long trip, and I'll pay for it for a month later. So I didn't get into the Portland show. But Julia is a sharp curator, so I'm sure she did well. The whole question of editing, of course, is really interesting, and I can say without any qualifications that I've spent as much time editing the books as I have making the pictures. And I owe a lot to my wife, who we knew when we got married that we both loved art, but I had no idea that she was both a good text editor and a great picture editor. Thank the Lord, because it's really exacting. Pictures modify each other so much, and these three pictures back here, for example.
This is his, Christoph.
Oh, well, they're wonderful, but I didn't see them. I saw, I think the first iteration I got of this, two of them were linked together, and then one, and they were kind of small, and so. Of course, I now think I understand. You correct me if I'm not, but they're all a burned.
Yeah, it's a project about burned.
Yeah,
earth.
it's wonderful. I hope. Are you doing something big with that, like a book or?
I wish. Tell me how to do a book. This is difficult. This is not easy.
But it's so timely, and they're so beautiful in a desperate kind of way. This particular one with its little isolated house that didn't burn.
Almost burned, but didn't.
Yeah, it's really, but I can just practically taste having 35 or so of these pictures and bringing them together in a book. Incidentally, you may not know, I didn't until 6 months ago, there's some new technology for bookmaking, and it doesn't solve all the problems, but it's not quite resorting to blurb. There's a kind of printing now that the best shop in the country does, and I think probably others do too. I'm thinking of Meridian Printing in Connecticut, where you pay by the book, but the quality is extremely high. And so if you're talking about doing books of up to about a run of about 400, you can suddenly, the economics are a lot different.
I don't have that many relatives.
Well, that's of course the other big issue is how you get the damn thing out of the garage once you made it, and that's of course a great puzzle. The distribution is a real question, but the manufacture of a high quality, hardbound, well designed book, now you end up paying $40 or $50 a copy for it, but this is it's a kind of a book that otherwise you would have probably had to find $75,000 or $100,000 to make. And so if you're down in a low number of copies, it really has changed quite significantly.
What is that, the name Meridian Printing? Is that what
Meridian.
Meridian is the outfit. And
use the indigo? Is that the indigo process?
Maybe that's it. That sort of rings a bell. They sent me a few samples of it because I was desperate, like we all are. How am I going to do anything? And I was impressed. It's not blurb. It's better. So.
Blurb is getting better than they used to be. I think continuously they're improving a little bit.
Good.
And after black and white work, I've done several magazine format books that cost like $10 to print.
Good.
On demand. And if you're into, small format books, cheaply done, that look pretty good. I think they look pretty good for $10.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful, of course.
It's hard to read, and I think they're as high a quality as pretty much most magazines you can get off the shelf, except for maybe Aperture is more of a book now. But, and Michael, I think, does his catalogs on Blurb. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Still,
Yeah, no, yes. I've done a lot of books that are worse than Blurb. So it's always a question of what can I bring out of. Only God creates out of nothing, but next to it, that's most of us are trying to do out of nothing. But it is hard. It is tough.
Anybody? What? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Understanding that your work is primarily shot in the United States almost entirely, but you talked about the international pull for this show. I was wondering if you could speak more to why. I'm a new follower of photography, and I wanted to know why you felt that was an important thing to mention in the realm of photography.
You mean why I think it's
Why
important?
was it important to mention in terms of this show?
I think I mentioned it.
Oh, okay, you mentioned it. Okay, yes.
I like
guess,
to brag about.
yeah. I guess that's the thing. You know, it's like, you know, your work seems to be centered in the United States, and it seems like there is a love-hate relationship, sort of, that you're speaking of right now, in terms of that. And I wanted to know if you could expand upon that.
Gee, if there's any hate, I don't feel it.
Okay.
We're just talking before we started here. One of the formative influences of my whole effort was just as I was beginning. My wife's Swedish, and we went primarily to Sweden, but we went down to Germany, to Cologne and Aachen, and I discovered churches built after the war that absolutely changed my life. I had never in this country seen anything like that architecturally. And so about 2 years ago, Thomas Sander Gallery in Cologne discovered that sort of my whole photographic track had changed after I discovered what was going on in Germany. And so we had a very interesting, and for me, lots of fun show of pictures that I took back in the United States, trying to find, actually, some of those qualities that I had been amazed by in Europe. So, no, God, I think, you know, if I had a wish, it would be that some of the civic generosity and conscience and responsibility that's apparent in Scandinavia and Germany could be brought here. Boy, and I know, you know, photographers in France and Germany and Sweden who are every bit as involved in this kind of thing as we are. I wish we could have reached them.
Do you have a question?
Yes, it's sort of a negative question, so I apologize in advance. I know that the sacred has always been central in your work, Mr. Adams, but I was wondering if there was ever a time when you fell out of love with photography. You know, when you said, okay, that's it, and, you know, it's left me, and how you then fell back in love with it again.
I can honestly say that has never happened in photography. What has happened, and it remains a permanent, apparently, torment, is that from an early age I was interested in art history. And about in the 1970s, it seems to me, the art world decided to go berserk. And it seems to me that what happened was that the Dada movement in Europe in the early part of the 20th century, it sort of handed off a hand grenade, and people kind of played with it. And then about 1970, it occurred to somebody that if you decided that art could not be defined and that the only thing that distinguishes art was novelty, then you had a key to making enormous amounts of money. And it seems to me that for about the last 50 years, we've seen the result of that. A kind of, if art is anything, then you know, hats off. You have things like, I think it was in Denmark 4 or 5 years ago, where a man filled a museum with a huge machine that produced shit, literally produced shit, and that was what the museum was occupied with. So I'm really angry. I feel betrayed by this. It's a constant problem in talking with people in the field, because if you go through university studio art program, you're taught to buy that, and it's very hard to recover and remember that art for art's sake is baloney. Art is for life's sake, and it's to try to take some of the pain out of life, really. So it gets really complicated. As one or two of you may know, I'm represented by a gallery in New York, Matthew Marks, and I sometimes think that I'm sort of the token figure. So.
Token beauty.
Yeah.
Do they actually manage to sell some of your work out of there?
Yes. It's so sad what sells, really. I mean, there are a couple of pictures in here Michael knows I would have been happy to have made myself. That's one of them. God, there's another one. I think was there a picture hung over here?
Let's see. What was there? I moved it.
Anyway, you know, the I don't know what that picture is.
This one here.
Price tag.
Damn golden.
Yeah, it's something like it's $350 or $400. Now let's face it. You know, by the time she gets it here, first of all, goes to make it, makes it, prints it, frames it, gets it here. If she sells it, she and Michael are going to split it, whatever it takes, and they're both. It's not even worth talking about. And yet, you know, I can sell something that I did early for thousands of dollars, and I should add to that the photography market and the large segments of the art market are very depressed at the moment. So for the last two checks I've gotten from my gallery in San Francisco, which is my main gallery, were both for $50, and they were both for repro rights from some obscure academic journal that wanted to, reproduce my picture in stamp size. But it's a crime, and it has almost nothing to do with the value of the picture. That's why galleries are necessary. Every time I go to San Francisco to the gallery that represents me, which does consistently sell, I'm there about an hour and I think, man, I could not do this if I lived to be 110, because you have to stand next to oftentimes totally ignorant, rude, people who you just have to. That's the way it works. I got a call once from my gallery. This was clear back in the 80s, and they said, we have a man who is ready to buy several prints, but he has to have a complete record of the prices for your pictures back to when you began. And I didn't do it because it was so clearly just a. But it's really discouraging because the reason there's not a picture in this exhibit where when the photographer looked through the finder, they didn't believe that they saw something beyond price. and yet, if you're trying to eat, at some point you will ask yourself, maybe I can sell this, and at some point you have to turn right around and take this thing beyond price and assign it a price, and it's a misery. So.
That really interests me in photography. In Portland, they do these huge portfolio reviews. They have this whole room of people passing portfolios down to each other. I knew some really great photographers who went in there, paid their $800 to go in and have it done, and they weren't paid for anything. And these are really interesting, exceptional photographers. And what seems to get through at the end of the process, the winner, quote unquote, is the least objectionable image that anybody can see. In other words, everybody agreed that this is a wonderful image. This magazine, that magazine, this magazine, that producer. That mediocrity of image is really dominant. In Portland, it's especially dominant.
I think all of those photo fair things you should really approach skeptically. Many people are recruited to do those reviews, and if you look at them, you have to ask, why am I subjecting myself to the judgment of this person? There are some exceptions, but you really have to go for them.
I'm going to suggest that we cut the talk short, and I'd like to bring Robert downstairs where it's a little cooler, and let everybody else kind of do the same thing. We'll wander downstairs. I'm going to hang out with Robert, and maybe we can meet a few of you individually. We were pretty familiar with all the images in the show, so and Robert will be around for a little while, and then. And I also wanted to say another thing just on the subject that we were just talking about art and photography and money, and it kind of struck a chord with me.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And the only reason this gallery's been here 10 years is because money is not what we're here for.
That's right.
It's here to pay the rent, and I take a little bit home. I haven't made much over the last 10 years, just enough to help me pay my mortgage and such. But that being said, our mission is to show this work and to have people come enjoy it, to learn the photographic arts, to be affected by the work, and not to be worrying about, oh, are they going to make me buy something? And that's kind of one thing that I always fight here is, and for years people would come to the front door and maybe look in, and half of them don't take what it takes to open that door and plant it in a story, or maybe it looks a little too fancy just because they have restored.
Take the door out.
In any case, that's kind of where we've been at, and that's why we can have a show like this. And it doesn't mean we don't sell anything, and we've gotten better at it. It's not been my forte because I never was a good salesman, but I don't think we would have survived as a straight commercial gallery because our freedom, we're not a nonprofit, we're not a commercial gallery, we're somewhere in between, and we make all those decisions ourselves at the spur of the moment, and I think that gives us the freedom to survive and to do whatever we want, and that's how this show came about, and it's really an honor. So does that sound like a good idea? Let's spread out of this room a little bit. We're going to come and get these chairs back where they're supposed to be so we can enjoy this gallery and such, and we'll go from there.